We have made it to the candidates. Welcome to today's video, y'all. It is round one. I can hardly believe it. I am so hyped for this tournament. I'm so excited to jump into today's games. I can't even talk straight because I'm so excited. I have some exciting games for you today. We have 8 players facing off. Whoever wins this tournament will be facing Jun in the World Championship. They will win the challenger spot. And so all of them are fighting for it. They all obviously want to play for the World Championship, but only one of them is going to get it. So we shall see what happens today in round 1. I have 4 games for you. This is going to be a double round robin event. What that means is the players all play each other twice. There will be a ton of rounds and whoever, has the most points at the end will obviously win. Winning some money, not enough in my opinion, but whatever. And also, get that challenger spot. The players are playing 90 minutes plus 30-second bonus up until move 40, where they get an extra 30 minutes added. So 30-second bonus is from move 1. So a bit of I would say a good time control, but it is going to go by really fast. Anybody who's played classical knows that time flies very quickly, and you'll be playing sometimes for hours and not even realize. So I'm very excited to see what's going to happen. Let's just jump right into it. First game of the day is going to be between Vaishali Rameshbabu versus Humpy Konaru. There is a bit of a rating difference between them. Vaishali is currently 24.75. She is a GM. Actually, let me add that in here. Okay, I fixed it because they're actually both GMs, and I feel like the title needs to be shown. So Vaishali is technically not over 2,500 currently, but she did go in the live ratings above 2,500. She has all 3 norms, so she's technically a GM. V-Day just has not given her title yet. So both of them are Grandmasters. Let's see how this game starts. We have Vaishali with the white pieces and Humpy with the black pieces. Vaishali starts us off with E4. And now, this is something that she normally does. We get E5, Knight F3, Knight C6, Bishop C4. This is known as the Italian. We get Bishop C5, C3, Knight to F6, attacking the E-pawn, and now we get D3 defending the D-pawn, or the E-pawn, and now we get H6. H6 doesn't have to be played here, but it's basically saying, hey, I don't want any of the complexities that come from this move, so we're just going to shut all that down, and Vaishali's like, okay, sure, but now I'm going to play B4. Bishop's going to back up. Whereas before, if she would have played not H6 and she would have just played D6, this wouldn't have been an option once B4 came. So that does change it just a little bit of the, the intricacies of the position. So we get Bishop E7, Knight B to D2, castles. Instead of castling, technically she could play B5, but B5 is a little bit overextending because after Knight to A5, 1, you're giving up the bishop pair, and then 2, after D5, white is just kind of overextended, and it's just not a great position. So she doesn't play B5, she just castles instead. And now we get D5, attacking the center. This is basically all the play that black has, is she has to strike with D5. So now bishop to B3, A6, and now A3, bishop E6, rook E1, and now B5. I thought this move just was a little bit strange because B5 would normally want to stop white from playing B5, but white is not going to be playing B5. It would have been impossible, so I thought this was a little strange, but it's fine. Bishop to B2, a lot of tension in the center with a lot of dynamics of basically the D3 pawn is backwards, and the E5 pawn has some pressure on it depending on the trades that happen in the center. So say here, instead of playing bishop to B2, if she just takes, now after knight takes D5, black would have a great knight moving eventually over to F4. So this could have been an option, but she decides to just play bishop to B2. Now we get D takes E4, D takes E4. She could have gone for bishop takes E6, but honestly, this gets really complicated after the following, and it's just a little crazy, and it just would have been very complicated. So she doesn't go into this, and she would have gotten her pawn back, and white would probably be happy here, but it just gets more complicated. So she goes for the safe line of instead just taking back with the pawn instead of taking the bishop here. Now we get bishop takes B3, queen takes, and A5. The players were playing pretty slow. They were under an hour and only a quarter of the moves into the game. This is only move 14 and they have to hit move 40 to be able to get any extra time. And they both have around 40 minutes. So Vaishali plays knight to F1. We get queen to C8, knight to e3, rerouting the knight to a better square, queen to e6, offering a trade of queens. She plays knight to d5, and now rook f to d8, knight takes f6 check, queen takes f6. If she would have taken with the bishop, it wouldn't have been great after this trade. And it's just kind of like, okay, why did you do this to yourself? So she takes with the queen, which makes sense. Rook a to d1, bishop to d6, and at this point, this move avoids trades. She's like, no, we're not going to trade rooks. And Vaishali is extremely low on time. I mean, 6 minutes left to make 20 moves. Mind you, they do get a 30-second bonus. However, anybody who's played classical knows when you're under that amount of time pressure and you're like, okay, I know I'm going to get 30-second bonus, but like you still have to make your moves very quickly. You have really no time to think. So let's see how Vaishali handles it. We get rook to d5, which makes a ton of sense, putting pressure on the b pawn. And now this knight is definitely going to come to this square and try and reroute itself to the f4 square, which is, we saw earlier, another knight could have possibly come over here and then come to this square. But so now she's going to bring it here with tempo. And this is exactly what we're about to see. We get rook d to b8 first, so that the b pawn doesn't fall. Rook e to d1, and now queen to e6, which is the same thing, but adding in the pin. Now she's really threatening knight to e7, whereas the rook would not be able to move anymore because of the pin on the queen. And so Vaishali has 40 seconds left, and she plays queen to c2. We get knight to e7, the whole plan coming to fruition, rook 5 to d3, and Vaishali has 54 seconds. She's gaining 30 seconds every time she plays, but she's under a minute at this point. It is move 23. She has to make a lot of moves to be able to hit time control. And meanwhile, Humpy has 10 minutes. So we get knight to c8, knight to d2, knight to b6, and now this knight is actually becoming a really good piece. Bishop to c1, bishop to e7, knight to f1, and this knight is just like so sad. Like, what is this knight doing? We get queen to c6, but mind you, Vaishali also has like no time, so this is very difficult for her to be making these moves. So her whole idea makes sense now. Knight to e3, that was the whole reason she went to f1. She's trying to go to f5, which would come with a lot of pressure, and then if rook g3 comes, it could get very complicated. So Humpy throws in a takes b4, and now the critical idea here, she could have played this move, because you're threatening this with, you know, a fork, and so she's not allowed to, you know, take either of these pawns. And so she would have to do something, but she doesn't play this. Instead, she plays c takes b4, offering a trade of queens, and Humpy takes it. So we get now a trade of queens, rook to d8. The knight is going to come into c4 and attack the a pawn, and honestly just have a really nice outpost on the c4 square. King to f1, bringing in the king. We get one trade of rooks, and now it's definitely Humpy who has chances, and she plays rook to d8, which honestly is an emergency move. She's bailing out. She's like, you know what, maybe I don't have compensation, or maybe not compensation, maybe I don't have an advantage, and I just want to turn this into a draw, basically. So we get king e2, the other rooks go off the board, king to f8, bishop e3, knight to c4, king to c3. Basically, she's offering a trade of this knight for this bishop. She would love for her to take here and then take back, because this is a semi-closed position, and a knight is just going to do better in that than a bishop is. The bishop would love an open board. And so she's offering a trade this way, and Humpy's like, no. King e8. Now f3, defending her pawn. h5, and now bishop to a7. She's threatening a4 here, and you can't take because then your knight would hang, and then you're gonna get a pass pawn because of that, because you can't take. And so this is actually a really serious threat. So she has to play knight to d6, and then we get a repetition of moves, and the game was a draw. And this was move, I believe, 41. So the players had just hit time control. Humpy actually went low in time, to at some point lower than Vaishali, which was like insane considering like Vaishali had like no time for like half of this game. And so kind of a wild game between both players. It was definitely Humpy who had chances, and she was putting the pressure on Vaishali. Vaishali was able to hold her nerves in low time. I think that was great. And a good showing from both of them. And that was the game between them. It was a draw. Our next game we have is between Grandmaster Alexandra Goryachkina, who is 2553, versus Grandmaster Katarina Lagno, who is 2542. Both of these players have been in the top 10 for a very long time. They are no stranger to playing each other, and we shall see how this game goes. We have Alexandra with the white pieces, and we get e4, which is a little bit strange considering she normally plays d4, so she's switching it up. And then we get c5. We get a Sicilian. I love this. Knight f3, knight c6, bishop to b5. I believe this is a Rosalimo. Is that correct? Yes, it is. Ha ha ha. Look at me knowing my Sicilian. We get d6, and now castles, bishop to d7, rook to e1, knight to f6, c3, a6. We get bishop going back to f1, which is kind of wild because that bishop is just like going to have trouble for a while and turning itself into a good piece. Now we get e5. The whole idea behind e5 is basically trying to stop d4, because if d4 comes now, after c takes, bishop to g4, pinning the knight, now after d5, knight to d4, you're going to go into this trade, which is doubled f pawns, not so great. And white is a bit better here, but I don't think Goryachkina wanted to go into this because she took a lot of time. And if you're not prepared to go into this, I don't think you want to play this position, especially with your king just forever being unsafe. And so instead of d4, she plays knight to a3, and which is a slower move. And now we get bishop e7, knight to c2, preparing again d4, castles, and h3. This idea is basically so that when she pushes d4, the bishop can't come back here to pin. And then we get rook e8. And then she doesn't play d4. She plays d3, which is still a good move, but it's forever entombing her bishop to this f1 square. We get h6, knight to e3, bishop to f8, and basically this is freeing the rook to look this way. And now knight to h2 and bishop to e6. Here she could have also played b5, and that would have been fine as well, just having a nice, you know, pretty structure on the queen side. But she plays bishop e6, and now we get queen to f3. And Goryachkina is going to have to figure out how to make her pieces better, because honestly, at this point, they're all in the way of each other, and they're not on optimal squares. The bishop on f1 sucks, and the knight on h2 also sucks. So we get knight to e7, and now knight h to g4. She's trying to trade off one of these knights, and we do get a trade, and now she really wants to go to f5. And so Katarina's like, I don't really want that, so I'm going to play g6. And then Goryachkina plays knight to f5. She says, I don't care. Take my knight. I dare you. Her plan, if she doesn't take the knight, is to come to h3. If black takes the knight, though, it gets a little crazy, because after this move, we would get bishop to d7, and now you can either play rook e3, and you know that your rook wants to come and lift itself anyway to come over here. You're not really 100% sure where your queen is supposed to go, so you could do the rook first. Also, I just want to say, if the bishop was literally anywhere but here, if it was like here, or anywhere that's literally not doing anything, and if it was doing something, this would be absolutely winning for white. But because this piece sucks so bad, this is just technically a draw, but black has to be like super careful. And so you can either play rook e3 or you can play queen to h5, which is just like such a nice move, and then still come through here. And black has to be super careful, because you can't ever really come here, because then this hangs. So it's a little scary. But instead, she doesn't take the, the knight. She's like, you know what? I don't want to go into this. No, thank you. She takes some time and she plays king to h7. She thought for roughly 7 minutes here. So she plays king to h7, defending the h6 pawn, and we get knight to g3. And honestly, this knight is horrible. Like, straight up trash. If she was gonna retreat, I think she probably should have gone this way and then maybe come this way. But she plays the knight to g3, which is just like so bad. Another idea is just saying, screw it, take my knight d4. I'm gonna open up my bishop. You still can't take because of all the same problems from before, but it's holding that tension. She doesn't do that though. She plays knight to g3 instead, and now after bishop to g7, which honestly this move just doesn't really do anything. It just, there's no reason for this bishop to be there. It actually probably after the knight moved, it maybe wanted to come here. So this isn't a super great move, but okay. She has the luxury of being able to do that at the moment, because white's pieces are just like doing nothing. And so now we get g5, h5, bishop to e2, rook to f8, bishop d1, and now she's trying to reroute this horrible bishop, as we can see. We get queen d7, bishop to b3, we get a trade of bishops, and now she's defending her b-pawn, rook a to d8. We get, finally this bishop gets to move too, and now knight to c6, knight to f1, rerouting this terrible knight. Now f5, trying to strike, g takes, queen to d2, we get queen to e6, and after bishop g5, we get a trade of bishops, and now knight to e3, and she doubles the rooks, and actually f2 is starting to become a little bit weak, but it is still objectively equal. We get rook to e2, the rook backs up, and now knight to d5, and honestly, that knight is a monster. I love that knight. It's on a beautiful outpost, and now queen to g4, and we get a repetition of moves from the players. So a draw between these two players. Definitely a tense game. I think Katarina definitely got what she wanted out of the opening. She was definitely better. I'm not sure why Goryachkina did not play d4. I guess she just didn't really want to go into it, but she was definitely on the back foot most of the game, trying to situate her pieces, but she was able to. So this was a draw. Definitely a tense draw, though. It was a little wild. Our third game is between Anna Moseichuk, who is 25-20 and a grandmaster. And then we have international master Nurgul Salimova, who is 24-32, definitely the underdog of this tournament, as she is the only international master, and there is a huge rating difference between these players, almost 100 points. Whereas in the other games, maybe the players would be a little more reserved. Definitely Salimova is going to be a target for wins from the other players. They're trying to get every win they can, because she's the easy target as being the weakest rating wise in the field. So any game that Salimova plays, or honestly Vaishali as well, because they're both at the bottom of the pack in terms of rating, is going to be a tense game. The players who are playing them are going to want to win, like way more than maybe if they were playing somebody their own rating. So let's see what happens. We have Moseichuk with the white pieces. She plays e4, and we get e5, which Salimova normally plays the Caro Kann, so I don't know if this was a surprise to Moseichuk. I'm not sure. But this is not normally what Salimova plays. We get knight to f3 and knight to f6. And now d4, the Petrov. And now knight takes e4. We get bishop to d3, d5. And after knight takes e5, knight to d7, knight takes, bishop takes, castles, bishop d6, knight to c3, we get a trade of knights, and after castles, queen to h5, and this is the critical moment, or definitely a tense moment. She has to decide what she's going to do. Is she going to give up the d-pawn, because white is threatening mate here, and also this pawn is hanging. So the only way for her to defend against both of these threats is to play the crazy f5, which she does. And this is definitely a wild move. I understand she doesn't want to give up her pawn, but pushing this pawn in front of the king is definitely going to create weaknesses. All of these squares are now therefore always going to be weak for black, because this pawn is always giving them up. I mean, technically, yes, this pawn is covering this square for now, but in terms of just in general, this pawn moving away just gives up these squares like forever. And so now we see rook to b1, taking the b file, why not? b6, defending, rook e1, we get c6, bishop to g5, attacking the queen, queen slides over to c7, a really nice square, c4. If you try and play h6 here to get rid of the bishop, they can actually take, because you are not allowed to take back. If you take back, now queen to g6 check, king to h8, queen to h6, and it's basically lights out for black. So this is impossible. Instead, here you would have to play something like bishop to e8, attacking the queen, and then probably rook takes, and maybe something like this. And then she would probably just move her bishop out of the way. And it's a little wild. Black is definitely floating around in the air. It's very drafty by the king. There's not a lot of defense over there. Basically, technically equal, but it's definitely a little scary. So we don't see h6. Instead, we see bishop e8 first. And now after queen to f3, we get d takes, bishop takes, and now bishop to f7, bishop takes, rook takes, and h3. And now we get f4, which I think is such an ambitious move, even though it is just pretty anti-positional and blocking in this battery that's going this way. It's just wild because she's trying to trap the bishop with playing eventually h6, and then once the bishop backs up, playing g5. So it's super wild. I love this. I think it's really fun. Very ambitious move. So we get bishop to h4, and now she doesn't play h6 immediately. She plays bishop to f8, because if she would have played the immediate playing of h6, now we get rook to e6, and it gets a little tricky, because if you move this bishop back, now you get rook takes c6, and after queen to b7 pinning, now you'd get probably rook to e1, and now after g5, you have bishop takes g5, h takes g5, and then you'd play like rook e5 and try and come in this way, and it's very complicated. Even though black has a piece, white got 2 pawns for it and an exposed king, so a little scary. So Salamova decides not to go for this. She instead decides to go for the immediate bishop to f8, and now we get rook to e6, rook to c8, c4, queen to d7. If here she decides to play h6, she can also do that, trying to play for, you know, the same plan of g5. And white would play queen to g4, and after g5, you cannot take because the king is pinned to the pawn, and so you'd play f3, giving your bishop a bailout square, and after queen to d7, pinning the rook to the queen, you'd get doubling of the rooks, protecting, and they would win this pawn, and after bishop to f2, the queen would go back, and white is actually doing great, even though they're down a pawn, because of what's coming of h4, and the position's going to break open, and white is actually doing great here. So even though you're down technically a pawn, the position is just crazy, and black's king is definitely way less safe compared to white's king. So we don't see this though, and the players don't have to go down this route. Instead we see queen to d7, queen to e4, and now f3, rook to e1. Look at this crazy setup on the e-file. And she lets her just take this pawn. F takes g2, bishop to g3, saying I'm just going to replace my pawn, I guess, with my bishop, and it's fine. Rook d1, defending the pawn. And now rook to e7, rook takes, queen takes. We get a huge change of pieces, and white is able to win this pawn back. And then king to f7, the kings come a little bit closer. We get a change of bishops, and the pawn structure changes, which is huge. Now these pawns are no longer separated, and they're now their own island together. Rook to e8 check, king d3, rook to e6, and we get rook g6 attacking the g pawn, and it's not so easy of what you're supposed to do. Do you play g4? Do you go and defend with your rook? She decides to play d takes c6 now, and then force a trade this way, because if she takes the other pawn, I don't know. I mean, I guess if, say here, instead she takes here, it's not so great because the king is going to be able to walk in, and after rook g6 coming for this pawn, you get to play either rook d7 check first. I'm not sure if you guys can hear my computer. I'm sorry if you can. Sorry if you guys can hear my computer. It's going a little wild. Okay, so rook d7 check, and now white is just completely winning. So I guess she wouldn't actually be able to go into this. Don't do this. So she takes the pawn, and then Muzichuk is forced to take back this way, and we get king to c3, king to e7, and then after king b4, rook c5, we end up getting a repetition of moves. The players drew. Salamova survived. She played a crazy game. F5, F4. She just was going for it, and honestly, I love that. And it was an exciting game. So no easy draws in the section so far, and on to our last game. And our last game of the day, which is one of the most exciting ones of the day, we have Grandmaster Lei Tingé with the white pieces, who is 2550. Oh, I've missed you, Lei. She hasn't played in like 8 months since the World Championship last year against Zhu and June. And I've missed her. Her play is so fun to watch. And so I'm so happy she's back. And we have Grandmaster Tan Zhongyi with the black pieces. She is 2521. Both of these players have a huge history with each other. They've been playing for years with each other. Starting us off, we have d4, knight f6, and I got so excited. I was like, oh, maybe we're going to get a King's Indian defense. No, we are not going to get that. We are instead going to get a Queen's Gambit. And so we have c takes d5, e takes, and now bishop to g5. This is a Carlsbad structure. A lot of play comes from the side where you actually don't have the majority, weirdly enough. So white has technically a majority on the king side, whereas black has a majority on the queen side. But weirdly enough, black is going to be playing on the king side, and white is going to be playing on the queen side. So we get bishop to e7, e3, h6, bishop h4, bishop g5. We get queen to c2, castles, h3, bishop to e6, knight to f3, knight takes e4, bishop takes h4, and now knight to c5. And she gets this really nice knight on c5, honestly. Bishop goes back to c8, knight takes, queen takes, and now bishop to e2. We get c6, pawns are pointing towards the king, all on light squares. That's where she's going to start attacking. We get b4. White is basically going kind of for a minority attack. And we get rook e8, and now castles, queen to g5, and now there's definitely some threats in the air. You know, black is threatening to take h3 because there's a pin on this pawn, and we get king to h1 sidestepping that. We now get knight d7, b5, and after a trade of knights, we get rook e6, and the pressure is on. Technically, this is equal, but black is the one definitely putting pressure. There's a lot of threats. White basically just has to survive, and they will probably have a better pawn structure, especially after b takes c6, because now rook g6 comes, and it's like, well, what do you want to do? Because there's a lot of threats in the air. She plays bishop to f3, which does make a lot of sense, because she's trying to defend the g2 point. And so after b takes c6, we get queen to a5, and her idea is basically to reroute her queen to be able to come in and defend the king if necessary. We get h5, which I love h5 because it's not, I guess, super intuitive, because you're pushing a pawn again, but it's saying, hey, I'm going to bring my pawn and try and use this as like a lever, or maybe a wedge is a better term, to open up your position. And so now bishop g5 is actually a huge threat, because if she, say, does nothing, say she plays like rook a to c1, this is really bad, because now bishop g4 comes in, and what are you going to do? If you take this, oh, it's lights out. It's lights out. There's really nothing you can do. You play what? Bishop e2, and now queen to h4 comes, and you're just going to die. It's going to be mate eventually. And so can't do that. And so you have to play something crazy, like bishop takes d5, and like still this is a problem, and black is just completely winning. So you're not allowed to just sit around. A bishop g4 can come, and you could play something else, but it's just crazy. And so we don't see rook a to c1. She instead plays queen to c7, and now white's queen is coming in just in time to defend the king. We get queen to h4, and now Lei kind of makes a not a great move. She plays queen to f4. Instead here, I think she should have played something different. Like, instead of, I don't know, I think she should have played something else, like rook a to c1. But this is a hard move to find, because after rook a to c1, If they take this way, now you have queen to h2, and this is very hard to see, because even after rook to f6, like you can't even take like it's very crazy. And so it's hard to see this, so she doesn't play rook a to c1. She can't play the immediate queen to h2, because if she plays queen to h2 now, you blunder bishop a6, and after you move your rook out of the fire, now you get queen takes f2, and now white is struggling very much, and you've lost a critical pawn. So she can't play queen to h2 immediately, which is I think why she plays instead she plays queen to f4. But now after this trade of queens, after rook f6, rook f to e1, rook or king to f8, rook a to c1, g6, king to h2, rook takes, rook takes, rook takes, and now after rook to d1 and a trade of rooks, white is just down a pawn and Tan Zhongyi is just up a clear pawn. And so we get a5, king to g3, bishop e6, and now Lei is going to have to figure out what to do. This is move 33. She had like literally no time, like so little time. So black plays king to e7, and now a3, rook b8, rook c5, rook to b2, and the rook is coming in. And even though you win this pawn, this is a critical pawn that is lost. And after bishop to f3, now king to f6, and here comes the king. This is move 37. Black basically wants to play g5, and then g4 and kick this bishop from defending the g2 pawn. And so white has to figure out a way to go against this. She plays rook to a6, and we get rook to f1, h4 to defend against g5, rook h1 now that the pawn is no longer defended by the g pawn, king to g3. And she plays this with literally like 30 seconds left on her clock. This is move 40. She just hit the time control. She gets 30 minutes, but she's now losing. She played this with seconds on her clock, and this happens all the time historically, that players blunder on move 40 right as you're about to hit time control and get your extra time, and she blunders. And the reason this is a blunder is because here she can't really play g3, because this is also losing, defending this pawn. So it's a hard move to find of what you're actually supposed to do, because after g3, rook to f1, and after king to e3, king to e5, and black is just slowly going to come in, and white is just going to be pushed back, and you're losing. And so instead, she had to find this move. She had to find bishop takes d5, which is such a hard move to find, especially when you have like 30 seconds left on your clock. Because now after rook takes h4, king to g3, rook to d4, and now bishop takes, and you're forced to take with the pawn. And then this is a lot more holdable. She's going to trade her pawns. She's going to trade her g pawn, and then also her king is going to take the other pawn here, and then it'll just be this one-on-one, and with perfect play it should be a draw. But this is a very hard move to find. It's very hard to find bishop takes d5 with 30 seconds left on the clock. And instead she decides to go for king to g3, having her king defend the h pawn, and now we get king to e5. And this is critical because now the king has marched into the center and is controlling the other king. So the black king is controlling the white king. After a4, king to d4, and here it comes. Rook to a8, king to e3, and now she's threatening g5, which is a very serious threat, because if, say you do nothing, and I don't know, you play something like this, now it's mate in two, because after g5, there's literally nothing you can do. If you take, it's mate, and if you do nothing, it's still mate. So she has to do something about this, and so she plays this move, and now g5 still comes, and she's forced to go down the exchange. And black still has to be a little careful here to make sure to catch the g pawn. And so after h4, we get king to g4, h3, g6, here comes the pawn. Tan Zhongyi converts this beautifully. After king to f2, now king to f4, and after rook to a1, g7 push, and you get this check-in, and now she gets to go and defend. And there was nothing really that Lei could do, and she resigned in this position. Tan Zhongyi with the only decisive result of the tournament. Beautiful game by her. Lei honestly just made some mistakes in low time, and she bailed out with that queen to f4 move earlier on in the game, right over here, where she didn't really have to do this. And I think if she would have been able to trade in a better way, honestly, she would have probably been better in the end game, and she would have had a better structure. But it didn't go that way. And so we had 3 draws and 1 win, only 1 decisive result. We shall see what happens tomorrow. An exciting day of chess, definitely to start us off. Let me know who you're rooting for in the comments. I personally am rooting for Lei, and so rough day for Lei CJ fans, because we're all very sad that she lost this game. I don't know if this is because she hasn't played Classical in like 8 months. I don't know. We'll see. She'll probably be able to bounce back. Hopefully, because she's my winner pick. So I hope she can. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I hope you're enjoying the candidates so far. And I'll see y'all for the next round. Bye.